Naomi's hands trembled as she walked down the dusty road to school that morning. Just a few minutes earlier, the school fees had been safely tucked inside her bag.
Welcome to Wild Shadow Tales. We do not just tell stories, we make you feel them. Smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell because trust me, you do not want to miss what's coming next.
But in her rush to beat the closing gate, she forgot to zip it properly. Somewhere along the road, the envelope had slipped out without her noticing. Now the burning morning sun beat against her face as tears streamed endlessly down her cheeks. She cried so hard that strangers turned to stare, yet not a single person stopped to ask if she was okay. It was as if her pain was invisible. Across the road, inside a tiny roadside shoemaker's shed made of old wood and rusted zinc, a man looked up from the slippers he was repairing. The moment he saw the little girl sobbing uncontrollably, something tightened inside his chest. He quickly dropped his tools and hurried toward her. "My child, what happened?" he asked softly. Naomi wiped her eyes with shaky fingers, struggling to breathe properly. "So my school fees. I lost it." The man frowned with concern. "Lost it? How?" "I don't know," she cried. "I searched everywhere. I checked my bag again and again, but it's gone." The shoemaker moved closer, lowering his voice gently. "Calm down first. Tell me everything." Naomi swallowed hard before speaking. "I live with my mother and my stepfather. My mom used to teach in a school before she lost her job. Since then, my stepfather has been taking care of us, but he's very harsh. He warned me this morning that I must return home with the school receipt. He said if I failed," her voice cracked, "he may throw my mother and me out of the house." The man's expression changed immediately. He understood that kind of suffering too well. He was poor himself. Everyone around the area knew him as Ogre Johnson, the struggling shoemaker who survived by fixing torn slippers and making cheap handmade sandals by the roadside. Most days he barely ate. Yet as he stared at Naomi's terrified face, he couldn't ignore her pain. "How much is a fee?" he asked quietly. "For 1,000 naira," Naomi whispered. For a moment Johnson froze. That money was everything he had left in the world. He had been saving it little by little for months to pay part of his overdue rent. If he gave it away, he honestly didn't know how he and his grandson would survive. But then Naomi burst into tears again. And that was enough. Slowly, Johnson reached into the pocket of his faded trousers and pulled out a small bundle of worn notes. His fingers tightened around it for a second, as if his heart was fighting his decision. Then, without another thought, he placed the money into Naomi's trembling hands. "Go and pay your fees," he said with a faint smile. Naomi stared at him in complete shock. "Sir, this is too much. Are you sure?" Johnson nodded slowly. "Yes, my daughter. Education is something nobody can steal from you. Stay serious in school. Don't follow bad friends. One day, your life will change." Fresh tears rolled down Naomi's cheeks, but this time they were different. "Thank you, sir. I swear, I'll never forget you. One day, when I become successful, I'll come back for you." Johnson chuckled weakly. "Then make sure you remember my name." "I will," Naomi replied immediately. He gently placed his rough hand on her head and whispered a silent prayer for her future. Then he returned to his tiny shed with an empty pocket and an empty stomach. Yet strangely, his heart felt lighter. As Naomi hurried toward the school gate, she looked back one last time at the poor shoemaker sitting alone under the broken umbrella. "God bless that man," she whispered. When Naomi finally returned home later that evening, exhaustion covered her face, but there was also relief in her eyes. She had successfully paid the fees, and the receipt was safely inside her bag. Her mother sat outside on a small wooden bench, looking drained from worry as usual. "Welcome back," her mother said quickly. "Did you pay the fees?" Naomi nodded. "Yes, Mom." Her mother immediately stood up in relief. "Thank God. Let me see the receipt." Naomi handed it over silently, but her expression suddenly changed. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you." Her mother frowned instantly. "What is it?" Naomi lowered her head. "I lost the money on my way to school." The woman froze. "You what?" "I didn't mean to," Naomi cried. "I think it fell from my bag. I searched everywhere. I was terrified." Her mother grabbed her head in frustration. Naomi, do you know what that money cost us? Your stepfather already thinks we are burdens in this house. If he hears this, I know. Naomi interrupted through tears. I was scared to even come home. The woman turned away angrily, breathing hard. Fear and frustration battled inside her at the same time. Then Naomi spoke again. But someone helped me. Her mother looked back immediately. Who? A shoemaker beside the road. Naomi said softly, almost smiling through her tears. He saw me crying and asked what happened. After I explained everything, he gave me 4,000 naira. Her mother blinked in disbelief. A stranger gave you that kind of money? Naomi nodded. He said it was the last money he had. The room suddenly fell silent. What's his name? Her mother asked quietly. Ogre Johnson. Naomi's mother slowly sat down, completely speechless. In a world where people ignored suffering every day, a poor man had sacrificed everything for a child he didn't even know. God will bless that man, she whispered emotionally. People like him are rare. Naomi smiled faintly. Mom, I promised him I'd never forget him. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. And you must never forget him. But while Naomi and her mother were planning how to thank Johnson properly, tragedy had already found its way to him. The next morning, Johnson sat quietly inside his little roadside shed, arranging the few handmade slippers he hoped to sell. Business had been painfully slow for weeks, but he still held onto hope. Then suddenly, loud shouting filled the street. Johnson looked up in confusion as several government trucks stormed into the area. Men in uniforms jumped down aggressively, while one shouted through a megaphone. All illegal roadside stalls must be removed immediately. This land belongs to the government. Panic erupted everywhere. Before Johnson could even gather his tools, workers began smashing wooden sheds apart. Please, let me remove my things first. Johnson begged desperately. Nobody listened. Within seconds, his tiny workshop was destroyed before his eyes. Slippers scattered across the dusty road. Shoes customers had brought for repair were crushed beneath heavy boots. His old umbrella snapped in half. Johnson stood frozen. Everything he had worked for gone in minutes. Tears burned his eyes as he stared helplessly at the ruins. How will I survive now? He whispered brokenly. Other traders cried and screamed around him, but the trucks simply moved on to the next street like nothing had happened. With trembling hands, Johnson picked up his hammer, the only thing left undamaged, and slowly began the long walk home beneath the scorching sun. But the nightmare waiting for him there was even worse. As he turned the corner to his compound, he suddenly stopped. His grandson Andrew was outside, crying uncontrollably. Their bags, clothes, mattress, and cooking pots had all been thrown onto the ground. Standing at the gate was their landlady, a heavy woman with a cold expression and absolutely no pity in her eyes. Ogre Johnson, she shouted. I warned you again and again. 1 year and 6 months of unpaid rent. I'm done listening to stories. Johnson rushed toward Andrew in panic. Andrew, are you okay? The boy nodded weakly while wiping his tears. Grandpa, they pushed everything outside. I begged them to wait for you. Johnson turned desperately to the landlady. Please give me a little more time. I lost my workshop today. I have nowhere else to go. But the woman folded her arms. I'm not running a charity home, she snapped. New tenants are coming. Sleep on the street if you want. Then she slammed the gate shut. Johnson and Andrew sat silently beside their scattered belongings as darkness slowly covered the street. People passed by staring at them, whispering quietly, but nobody offered help. Johnson pulled Andrew close and fought back tears. I'm sorry, my child, he whispered painfully. I try my best. Andrew rested his head against his grandfather's shoulder. You're still the best grandfather in the world. Johnson looked up at the darkening sky, his voice barely audible. God, I don't regret helping that little girl. Even if I had another chance, I would still help her. But please, we need a miracle now. That night, grandfather and grandson slept outside on the cold ground beside their bags, hungry, homeless, and abandoned by the world. But Johnson still refused to lose hope completely. And by morning, a shocking twist was already waiting for them. Johnson and Andrew barely slept through the night. The cold concrete ground had left their bodies aching, and hunger twisted painfully in their stomachs. Before sunrise, Johnson slowly sat up and stared into the distance for a long moment, as if searching for answers in the empty street. Then he turned to Andrew and gently touched his shoulder. "My son," he said quietly, "we can't continue like this. Let's leave this city. I still have an old friend named Simon in the next town. Maybe God will use him to help us." Andrew nodded without hesitation. No matter how hard life became, he trusted his grandfather completely. Johnson gathered the few belongings they still had. The only valuable thing left was their small television set. With a heavy heart, he sold it that morning and used the money to buy 2 bus tickets. The old bus was overcrowded and noisy. They sat at the back, holding their worn-out bags tightly on their laps. Though the journey was barely an hour, it felt endless. Johnson kept staring out the dusty window, whispering silent prayers under his breath. "Please, God," he murmured, "don't let this be the end for us." Finally, they arrived. Johnson led Andrew through narrow streets until they stopped in front of a faded compound gate. "This is Simon's house," he said softly. He hadn't seen his friend in years. For a second, fear gripped him. What if Simon had moved away? What if he refused to help? Johnson knocked gently. A few moments later, the gate creaked open. Simon stood there staring at him, in complete shock. "Johnson," he gasped. The moment Simon saw the tired faces, dusty clothes, and bags in their hands, his expression changed immediately. "My brother, what happened to you?" Johnson forced a painful smile, but tears quickly filled his eyes. "Everything is gone," he whispered. "The government destroyed my shoemaking stall yesterday. Then my landlord threw my grandson and me out the same evening. We slept outside all night." Simon looked heartbroken. Without wasting another second, he pulled the gate wide open. "Come inside first," he said quickly. "Forget explanations for now. Come inside." He gave him water, food, and a place to sit. Andrew ate silently like someone who hadn't seen a proper meal in days. Then suddenly, Simon shook his head slowly and laughed in disbelief. "Johnson, you came here at the perfect time." Johnson looked confused. "What do you mean?" Simon smiled warmly. "My wife and I are relocating to Abuja this weekend. My son just built us a new house there. In fact, I was about to return this house to the landlord today, so I could collect the balance of the rent." Johnson blinked in confusion. Simon continued, "The rent here is already paid for 1 full year. You and Andrew can stay here instead." Johnson's mouth fell open. "What?" "Yes," Simon said firmly. "You'll take over the house. I'll tell the landlord to transfer everything into your name. You don't need to pay anything for now." Johnson covered his mouth with both hands as tears rolled freely down his face. "Simon, you want to give me this house?" Simon sat beside him and smiled. "Do you remember years ago when my mother was dying in hospital? You sold your phone just to help me pay part of her bills. You saved my family back then. Today is simply my turn." Johnson broke down completely. He dropped to his knees, shaking with emotion. "God will bless you, my brother," he cried. "You have saved us." But Simon wasn't finished. "There's something else," he said. He walked into his room and returned with an envelope. "I saved this money for emergencies," he explained. "Use it to start another shoemaking business. Buy leather, tools, whatever you need. And make sure Andrew goes back to school properly." Johnson couldn't speak anymore. He simply held Simon's hands tightly while tears streamed down his face. Just yesterday, he had nothing. Now suddenly, he had shelter, food, and another chance at life. Andrew smiled for the first time in days. "Thank you so much, sir," he said gratefully. "I promise I'll make everyone proud someday." 3 days later, Naomi reminded her mother about the promise they made. "Mom," she said, "we need to go back and thank that man." Her mother nodded immediately. Yes, a person with that kind of heart deserves appreciation. Together, they boarded a bus and returned to the roadside where Naomi had met the shoemaker. But the moment they arrived, Naomi froze. Everything was gone. The entire row of roadside stalls had been demolished. Broken planks, scattered baskets, and torn umbrellas lay abandoned under the hot sun. The place looked like a battlefield after destruction. Naomi's chest tightened painfully. "Mom," she whispered. "This is where he sat. This was his shed." Her mother looked around sadly. It must be the demolition people were talking about. Naomi searched desperately for someone who knew him, but the street was empty. No Johnson, no Shoemaker, no trace. With heavy hearts, they returned home. But another disaster was already waiting for them. The moment they entered the compound, Naomi's stepfather was standing at the entrance with anger written all over his face. "Where are both of you coming from?" he demanded. Naomi's mother answered calmly. "We want to look for the man who helped Naomi pay her school fees." The man frowned immediately. "What man?" Naomi's mother explained everything. But instead of understanding, the man burst into loud, mocking laughter. "So this is the story you came up with?" he sneered. "You expect me to believe you spent the whole day looking for some shoemaker?" Naomi stepped forward nervously. "Sir, it's true. Shut up," he roared. Then his eyes turned dark with suspicion. "You think I'm stupid?" he shouted at Naomi's mother. "You're cheating on me with that man, aren't you? That's why you rushed there this morning." Naomi's mother stared at him in shock. "How can you say such a thing? I know women like you," he yelled. "And your daughter is learning from you already." "Sir, please," Naomi tried to speak. "Enough," he screamed. "Both of you are useless burdens in my life. Leave my house right now and go meet your shoemaker boyfriend." Before they could react, he stormed inside and began throwing their clothes and bags outside violently. "Get out." Naomi's mother stood frozen with humiliation burning in her chest. She knew arguing would only make things worse. Silently, she picked up their bags, and together they walked aimlessly through the streets with nowhere to go. Eventually, they found a small roadside shop with an empty wooden bench outside. The shop owner pitied them and allowed them to sit there for the night. As Naomi and her mother sat quietly in exhaustion, a strange-looking man approached them. His clothes were dirty and torn, and people passing by avoided him as if he were mad. "Mama," he said gently to Naomi's mother, "I beg help me buy water." She checked her pocket. Only 500 naira remained. Still, she removed 200 naira and handed it to him. The man smiled brightly. "Thank you, Mama." Then suddenly, he pulled out a crumpled raffle ticket from his pocket. "Take this," he said mysteriously. "You will become a millionaire soon." Naomi's mother almost laughed, but something about the man's eyes made her pause. Quietly, she collected the ticket and kept it. Days later, after struggling all morning carrying goods and helping traders at the market just to earn food money, Naomi's mother walked past a raffle shop. Suddenly, she remembered the strange ticket. Out of curiosity, she stepped inside. "Can you help me check this?" she asked casually. The shop owner collected the ticket. A few seconds later, his eyes widened. Then he shouted loudly, "Madam, this is the winning number." Naomi's mother blinked in confusion. "What? You won the jackpot!" the man screamed excitedly. 100 million naira. The world around her suddenly felt unreal. Her knees nearly gave way. 100 million? Yes, the man shouted again. "You are rich." Naomi's mother collapsed into the nearest chair as tears burst from her eyes uncontrollably. For years she had known nothing except suffering, shame, insults, and rejection. And now, in one unbelievable moment, everything had changed. No more hunger, she cried. No more shame. 15 years passed. Naomi was no longer the frightened little girl crying by the roadside. She had grown into a stunning, intelligent, and powerful young woman. After her mother won the jackpot, they invested wisely, built businesses, and multiplied their wealth beyond imagination. Naomi studied hard, graduated from university, and eventually launched her own company. Within a few years, her business became one of the fastest-growing companies in the country. People admired her beauty, intelligence, and humility. But despite all her success, one person never left her heart. Ogre Johnson. Every single year, on the exact date he helped her, Naomi would sit quietly in her office and remember the poor shoemaker who gave away his last money to save a crying child. She searched for him many times over the years, but nobody knew where he disappeared after the demolition. Still, she refused to stop looking. One day, she always whispered to herself, I'll find him. Meanwhile, far away in a struggling neighborhood, Johnson and Andrew were still battling poverty. Life never became easy for them. The help Simon gave them saved them temporarily, but survival remained difficult. Johnson reopened a tiny roadside shoe stall, though age had weakened him badly. His back hurt constantly, and his eyesight had started failing. Andrew, now a grown man, had graduated from university 1 year earlier. But despite countless applications and interviews, he still couldn't find a stable job. So he stayed beside his grandfather, helping him design and repair shoes. Some days they sold enough to eat. Other days they went home hungry. Still, Andrew never lost hope. "Grandpa," he would often say, "our story won't remain like this forever." Johnson smiled weakly each time. "I pray so, my son." One evening, while closing their stall, Johnson suddenly became quiet. "Andrew," he said softly, "do you remember the little girl I once helped many years ago?" Andrew smiled. "Of course. You've told me that story many times." Johnson stared into space. "I wonder where life took her," he whispered. "I hope she fulfilled her dreams." The next Saturday morning, Johnson left early for the market to buy leather for a customer's order, leaving Andrew alone at the stall. Andrew sat quietly polishing a shoe when suddenly a sleek black luxury car stopped directly in front of the stall. His hands paused instantly. The tinted window rolled down slowly. Then a stunning woman stepped out gracefully. Her expensive perfume filled the air. She wore an elegant black and gold caftan decorated with floral designs, sparkling gold earrings, and high heels that clicked sharply against the rough roadside pavement. But when the shoe buckles had snapped loose, the woman sighed softly before walking toward the stall. "Good afternoon," she said calmly. In a moment, Andrew looked into her eyes. Something about her felt strangely familiar. Andrew looked up immediately, slightly startled by her voice. "Good afternoon, Ma," he replied respectfully, quickly wiping his hands on a small cloth. The elegant woman lifted one foot gently. One of the gold buckles on her heel had snapped loose. "Can you fix this for me, please?" she asked. It suddenly came off. "Of course, Ma," Andrew said politely. "Please sit." He carefully collected the shoe and crouched down beside the stall. His fingers moved skillfully, tightening the buckle with surprising precision. Though the roadside stall looked poor and worn out, there was dignity in the way he worked. The woman watched him silently. There was something different about him. No arrogance, no desperation, just calmness. Within a few minutes, Andrew finished and handed the shoe back to her carefully. "It's fixed, Ma." She wore it again and tested the buckle. "Perfect. How much do I owe you?" she asked. Andrew smiled faintly and shook his head. "No need, Ma. It was just a small adjustment." Her brows lifted in surprise. "You're not charging me?" "No, Ma," he replied gently. "You looked like you were in a hurry. I just wanted to help." The woman stared at him for a second longer than necessary. That answer was rare, especially in a world where almost everyone wanted something in return. She glanced around the tiny wooden stall. "How long have you been doing this work?" Andrew hesitated briefly before answering. "Since I graduated from university, Ma." Her eyes narrowed slightly in surprise. "You graduated?" "Yes," he replied quietly. "I've searched for work for over a year now, but nothing came. So I decided to join my grandfather instead of sitting at home doing nothing." The woman slowly nodded, clearly impressed. "What's your name?" "Andrew, Ma." "Andrew," she repeated thoughtfully, almost as if trying to remember something. "You speak well. You seem educated and trustworthy." Andrew smiled shyly. "Thank you, Ma." A short silence followed. Then suddenly, she spoke again. "I'm looking for a new driver." Andrew blinked. "Driver, Ma?" "Yes," she said calmly. "My former driver relocated recently. I need someone reliable, someone respectful. Most people these days are dishonest or careless." She paused while studying his face closely. "But you seem different." Andrew's heart skipped. For a second, he genuinely thought he heard wrong. "Are you serious, Ma?" "Very serious," she replied with a warm smile. "If you don't know all the routes, I'll train you myself. You'll be paid well, and you'll stay comfortably in my house." Andrew almost lost his breath. A few minutes ago, he had simply been repairing a shoe buckle. Now, suddenly, His life seemed to be changing. "Thank you so much, Ma," he said emotionally. "You don't know what this means to me." The woman reached into her handbag and brought out a sleek business card. "My name is Madam Tina," she said while handing it to him. "Call me tomorrow if you're interested." Andrew collected the card carefully, almost like something sacred. "I'll call Ma. I promise." Madam Tina smiled softly, entered her black luxury car, and drove away slowly. But even after the card disappeared, Andrew remained standing there, staring at the card in disbelief. His hands trembled slightly. For the first time in years, hope returned. That evening, Johnson returned from the market looking exhausted. Sweat covered his face, and his shoulders looked weak from carrying heavy leather bags. But the moment he entered the compound, he stopped. Andrew was smiling. Not just smiling, grinning like someone who had just won millions. Johnson narrowed his eyes suspiciously. "Andrew," he said slowly, dropping his bag. "Why are you smiling like this? What happened?" Andrew rushed toward him excitedly. "Grandpa, I have good news." Johnson sat down carefully. "All right, let me hear it." Andrew explained everything quickly. The elegant woman, the broken shoe buckle, the conversation, and finally the job offer. "Her name is Madam Tina," Andrew finished proudly. "She's very rich. She said her daughter travels often and her former driver relocated. Grandpa, she offered me the job immediately." Johnson's expression changed instantly. "A job?" he asked slowly. "Yes, just like that." Andrew nodded excitedly. Johnson leaned back carefully, suddenly uneasy. "She wants you to live in her house." Andrew's smile faded slightly. "Yes, Grandpa." Johnson became quiet for a few seconds. Then he sighed deeply. "Andrew, this world is dangerous." "Grandpa, no, listen to me first," Johnson interrupted firmly. "Some rich people are not normal. You see expensive clothes and big cars and think everything is fine. What if she has bad intentions?" Andrew rubbed his face gently. "Grandpa, please don't think like that." Johnson's voice softened immediately. "You're all I have left, my son." The old man looked away emotionally. "I lost your mother the same day you were born," he whispered painfully. "She was only 16 years old. Since then, you became my entire world. If anything happens to you," his voice broke. Andrew quickly held his grandfather's hand. "Nothing will happen to me," he said softly. "She didn't pressure me. She even told me to think about it first. She never asked for anything strange." Johnson still looked troubled. "My spirit is not settled." "I'll be careful," Andrew assured him. "When I get there, I'll ask questions around the estate first. If I notice anything suspicious, I'll leave immediately." Johnson stared into his eyes for a long moment. Then finally, he sighed heavily. "You're a man now," he admitted quietly. "I can't stop you from chasing a better future." Andrew smiled warmly. "This could be the breakthrough we've been praying for, Grandpa." Johnson forced a weak smile. "I just want you safe." "I will be safe," Andrew promised. "And once I start earning properly, you'll stop suffering under the hot sun every day." That night, after Andrew went inside to prepare his things, Johnson sat outside alone beneath the dark sky. He folded his hands and whispered quietly, "Lord, if this woman was truly sent by you, let it bring peace into Andrew's life. But if danger is hiding behind that kindness, don't let my grandson walk into it." The next morning, Andrew stood outside, nervously holding his phone. After taking a deep breath, he dialed Madam Tina's number. It rang twice. Then her calm voice answered. "Hello." "Good morning, Ma," Andrew said respectfully. "This is Andrew." "Oh, Andrew," she replied warmly. "I was hoping you would call." He smiled slightly. "I spoke with my grandfather." He agreed. "That's wonderful," she said happily. "I'll send you my address immediately. Once you reach the estate gate, call me." "Thank you, Ma." After the call ended, Andrew rushed inside excitedly. "Grandpa, I'm leaving." Johnson stood up immediately. Worry filled his eyes again, though he tried not to show it. He placed his hand gently on Andrew's head. "God will go with you," he prayed softly. "Please remember everything I told you. Stay alert." "I will, Grandpa." Andrew packed his small bag, hugged him tightly, and headed for the bus park. The journey lasted nearly 2 hours. When he finally arrived at the estate gate, He was speechless. Massive mansions lined the streets. Security guards stood everywhere. Even the roads looked cleaner than anywhere he had ever seen. A tall security guard approached him. "Are you Mr. Andrew?" "Yes." "Follow me. Madam Tina is expecting you." As they entered the compound, Andrew's eyes widened in shock. The mansion was breathtaking. Beautiful flowers lined the pathway. White marble floors reflected sunlight. A sparkling swimming pool sat behind the house like something from a movie. Madam Tina walked out smiling elegantly. "Welcome, Andrew," she said warmly. "This is your new home now." Andrew struggled to hide his amazement. "Thank you, Ma." She personally showed him his room. Clean, spacious, and luxurious. "There's the parking area beside the pool," she explained. "You'll handle the vehicles carefully." "And Andrew?" "Yes, Ma. I treat loyal workers like family." Andrew nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Ma. I won't disappoint you." He started work immediately. Within days, he became trusted completely. He was always punctual, respectful, calm, and hardworking. 2 weeks later, something unexpected happened. Madam Tina's only daughter returned home from an overseas business trip. Andrew was polishing one of the cars when he heard soft footsteps behind him. He looked up and froze. A tall, breathtakingly beautiful woman stood there wearing a fitted cream-colored suit. Her confidence, elegance, and grace immediately commanded attention. "Good morning," she said calmly. Andrew stood quickly. "Good morning, Ma." She tilted her head slightly while studying him. "So you're the new driver my mother keeps talking about?" "Yes, Ma. My name is Andrew." A faint smile touched her lips. "Nice to meet you, Andrew." Then she walked into the house gracefully. But strangely, Andrew couldn't stop watching her. That afternoon, Madam Tina called him. "Please drive my daughter to her office," she instructed. "She has an urgent meeting." "Yes, Ma." A few minutes later, Naomi walked out wearing a navy blue dress while holding a designer handbag. Andrew quickly opened the back door respectfully. But Naomi surprised him. "No," she said lightly. "I'll sit in front. I hate shouting directions from the back seat." Andrew smiled awkwardly. "Okay, Ma." The drive began quietly. Soft Afro soul music played faintly in the background. Then suddenly, a reckless motorcyclist swerved directly into their lane. Everything happened in seconds. Andrew gripped the steering wheel firmly, turned sharply, and slammed the brakes. The car stopped inches away from collision. Naomi gasped loudly, clutching her chest. "Oh my God!" But Andrew remained calm. "I'm sorry, Ma," he said steadily. "I saw him early enough." Naomi slowly turned to look at him. Most drivers would have panicked, but Andrew stayed composed. Protective, controlled, safe. "Thank you," she whispered softly. When they finally arrived at her office, Naomi hesitated before stepping out. "You're a very careful driver," she admitted. "Most people would have lost control." Andrew smiled politely. "My job is to protect whoever enters this car." Something about that sentence stayed in Naomi's mind all day. Days turned into weeks, and without realizing it, Naomi started looking forward to every drive with him. Sometimes she invited him for lunch. Other times she asked about his dreams, his childhood, even his grandfather. Andrew always answered respectfully, never trying to impress her. And somehow, that made him even more attractive. One rainy afternoon, traffic trapped them for almost an hour. Rain danced gently across the windshield while soft music played quietly. Naomi turned slightly toward him. "Andrew," she asked suddenly, "do you ever wish for a completely different life?" He smiled faintly without taking his eyes off the road. "Of course, Ma. But I've learned something. If you spend all your time complaining, you'll never appreciate the little peace God gives you." Naomi stared at him silently. That answer touched something deep inside her. Most wealthy men she met were arrogant, loud, and obsessed with status. But Andrew felt peaceful, safe, real. When they reached her office, Naomi remained seated for a few extra seconds, pretending to check her phone. Truthfully, she simply didn't want the moment to end. "Thank you for the ride," she said quietly. "You're welcome, Ma." As she walked into the rain, her heart felt strangely restless. That weekend, Madam Tina gave Andrew permission to visit his grandfather. "Go and see him," she said kindly. I'm sure he misses you. Andrew smiled happily. With his first salary, he bought groceries, a new kaftan, and a pair of leather shoes for Johnson. The moment he arrived home, Johnson rushed outside and hugged him tightly. "My son," he exclaimed joyfully, "you're looking fresh. God has finally remembered us." Andrew laughed. "Grandpa, I missed you too." Inside the house, Johnson served him hot spicy rice and stew, his favorite meal. As they ate together happily, Andrew suddenly became shy. "Grandpa, there's something I need to tell you." Johnson looked up immediately. "What is it?" Andrew scratched his head nervously. "There's a girl." Johnson slowly dropped his spoon. "A girl?" Andrew nodded shyly. "She's Madame Tina's daughter." Johnson folded his arms immediately. "And?" Andrew smiled helplessly. "She's beautiful, intelligent, respectful, and—" Johnson narrowed his eyes. "And what?" Andrew took a deep breath. "I think I'm falling in love with her." The spoon nearly slipped from Johnson's hand. "Andrew, what did you just say?" "Yes, Grandpa," Andrew admitted softly. "I haven't told her yet because I'm scared. I don't even know if she feels the same way. But there's just something about her, the way she talks to me, the way she smiles, the way she notices little things about me." Johnson watched him carefully before a slow smile spread across his face. "Love is beautiful, my son," he said gently. "But don't rush your heart. Look carefully before you fall too deep." "I'm trying not to rush," Andrew replied honestly. "But every time I see her, my heart becomes weak. I can't explain it." Johnson chuckled softly. "That's exactly how love begins." Andrew lowered his voice shyly. "But what if she doesn't love me back?" Johnson placed a hand firmly on his shoulder. "Then pray. If this love truly came from God, nobody can stop it. What God has written for you will always find you." Andrew smiled quietly, hope glowing in his eyes like a light finally returning after years of darkness. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Naomi lay on her bed staring at the ceiling with a smile she couldn't hide anymore. "Andrew," she whispered softly to herself. His name had completely taken over her thoughts. No matter how hard she tried to focus on work or business meetings, she kept remembering his smile, his calmness, and the way he spoke with quiet confidence. Finally, she stood up and walked downstairs where her mother, Madame Tina, sat sipping tea while flipping through a magazine. "Mom," Naomi called softly. Madame Tina looked up immediately. "You look troubled. Is everything okay?" Naomi hesitated for a moment before finally speaking. "Mom, I'm in love with Andrew." Instead of shock, Madame Tina simply smiled knowingly and placed her teacup down. "I already knew." Naomi blinked in surprise. "You knew?" Madame Tina laughed softly. "My daughter, I see the way you suddenly volunteer for errands whenever he's driving. I see the way your face changes whenever he enters a room." Naomi laughed shyly before finally admitting it fully. "Yes, Mom, I love him." Then she paused before adding quietly, "And I want to marry him." Madame Tina stood up slowly and held her daughter's hands warmly. "You chose well, Naomi." Relief flooded Naomi's face instantly. "He's respectful, hard-working, humble, intelligent, and God-fearing," Madame Tina continued proudly. "A man's financial condition doesn't define his value. God bless this family beyond money already. We can never look down on someone because he started from nothing." Naomi hugged her mother tightly. "Thank you, Mom." But then she smiled shyly again. "I still won't tell him first, though." Madame Tina laughed loudly. "Good. Let the man suffer small first." The next day, Andrew returned from visiting his grandfather. The moment Naomi saw him walking into the compound carrying his small travel bag, her heart skipped wildly. She quickly walked over to help him. "Welcome back," she said warmly. "Thank you, Ma," Andrew replied automatically. Naomi stopped walking and turned dramatically. "No more, Ma." Andrew froze. "Sorry." She folded her arms playfully. "My name is Naomi." Andrew smiled awkwardly. "Okay, Boss Lady Naomi." Both of them burst into laughter instantly. But after a few seconds, Andrew suddenly became serious. "Naomi, can we talk?" Her heartbeat jumped immediately. Of course. He led her quietly toward the small garden behind the mansion. Flowers swayed gently in the evening breeze while birds chirped softly above them. Andrew stopped walking and turned toward her slowly. His hands trembled slightly. Naomi, he began nervously. I know this may sound crazy, maybe even foolish. Naomi's heart raced harder. But I can't hide it anymore. He swallowed deeply. I'm in love with you. The world around Naomi suddenly felt still. From the first day I saw you, Andrew continued emotionally, I couldn't stop thinking about you. Your smile, your kindness, the way you speak to people without pride. You stole my heart completely. His voice cracked slightly. I know you're far above my level. I know I might even lose my job because of this confession, but keeping quiet hurts more. Then he looked directly into her eyes. Please tell me, do you feel anything for me too? For a few seconds, Naomi couldn't even breathe properly. Then slowly, a smile spread across her face. She stepped closer until they were standing only inches apart. Andrew, she whispered emotionally, I fell in love with you too. Andrew blinked in complete shock. What? Naomi laughed through tears. I've loved you for a long time already. Then why didn't you say anything? He asked. She rolled her eyes playfully. Because I'm a woman. The man is supposed to say I love you first. Andrew laughed so hard tears entered his eyes. So all this time? Yes, she interrupted shyly. All this time. Andrew gently held both her hands. I love you with all my heart. Then finally, he pulled her into a warm embrace beneath the evening sky. The flowers swayed around them, while soft wind moved gently through the garden like nature itself was celebrating their love. Inside the mansion, Madame Tina secretly watched from the window with a proud smile. And far away, in his tiny room, Johnson knelt beside his bed, praying quietly. Lord, he whispered, wherever my grandson is tonight, let it be happy. He had no idea his prayer was already being answered. A few days later, Andrew turned to Naomi excitedly. I want you to meet my grandfather. Naomi smiled instantly. I'd love that. He has to meet the woman who stole his grandson's heart, Andrew added proudly. That Saturday morning, they both dressed simply and prepared for the visit. As they drove toward Johnson's neighborhood, Naomi's nervousness grew. Are you nervous? Andrew asked while holding her hand gently. A little, Naomi admitted with a laugh. I've never visited the family of someone I'm planning to marry before. Andrew smiled. Relax. Grandpa will adore you. When it finally arrived, Naomi looked around quietly. The area was humble and peaceful. Andrew pushed open the small wooden door and led her inside. The house was simple but warm. It felt real, filled with love instead of luxury. Is your grandfather around? Naomi asked softly. He probably stepped out briefly, Andrew replied. He'll be back soon. A few minutes later, the front door opened slowly. Johnson entered carrying a black nylon bag filled with groceries. The moment he saw Andrew, his tired face lit up. My son, he exclaimed happily. You didn't tell me you were coming today. Andrew laughed. I wanted to surprise you, Grandpa. Then he turned toward Naomi. And I brought someone special. Naomi immediately knelt respectfully. Good afternoon, sir. Johnson smiled warmly. Good afternoon, my daughter. Then he chuckled while studying her face. Andrew, you didn't tell me your visitor was this beautiful. Everyone laughed softly. But suddenly, Naomi stopped smiling. Her eyes remained fixed on Johnson's face. Something deep inside her stirred violently. A memory, a voice, a dusty roadside, a poor shoemaker under a broken umbrella. Her heartbeat accelerated. Slowly, she stepped closer. Sir, she whispered shakily. Please, what is your name? Johnson looked confused. My name is Ogre Johnson. Naomi's breath caught instantly. Andrew noticed her trembling slightly. Naomi, he asked softly. But Naomi couldn't take her eyes off Johnson anymore. You don't remember me, do you? She asked emotionally. Johnson frowned gently. I'm sorry, my daughter. Have we met before? Tears filled Naomi's eyes immediately. Many years ago, she began slowly. I was a little girl crying beside the roadside because I lost my school fees. Johnson froze slightly. You were sitting inside a tiny shoemaker shed, Naomi continued. I told you my stepfather would throw my mother and me out if I returned home without paying. Johnson's breathing changed. You gave me 4,000 naira, Naomi whispered tearfully. Your last money. Johnson's eyes widened in shock. You prayed for me. You told me never to forget your name. Suddenly, the nylon bag slipped from Johnson's hand. My God, he whispered weakly. Naomi fell to her knees before him, crying. Yes, sir. I'm that little girl. The room went completely silent. Johnson stared at her like someone dreaming. No, he whispered. Impossible. Naomi nodded through tears. You saved me that day. You gave me hope when I had nothing. Johnson slowly sat down, completely overwhelmed. That little girl, he whispered brokenly. Was you? Yes, Naomi replied emotionally. And I searched for you for years. Andrew stood frozen in disbelief while tears filled his eyes too. Grandpa, he whispered. Naomi held Johnson's shaking hands tightly. You changed my entire life with one act of kindness. And today, she smiled tearfully while looking at Andrew, I discover the man I fell in love with is your grandson. Johnson finally broke down completely. Tears rolled freely down his aged face. God, he cried, you are too faithful. Andrew knelt beside him emotionally. Grandpa, you always prayed for her without even knowing where she was. Johnson looked between both of them in shock and joy. So all this time, he whispered. Naomi smiled warmly. This is bigger than coincidence, Grandpa. This is destiny. Johnson laughed through tears. Andrew, he said emotionally, you didn't tell me you fell in love with an angel. Everyone burst into emotional laughter. For the first time in years, Johnson's tiny house felt overflowing with joy. The next morning, Naomi woke up with one decision already made in her heart. She didn't just want to thank Johnson with words. She wanted to honor him properly. Later that afternoon, she asked Johnson and Andrew to sit outside the house. A few minutes later, several vehicles suddenly arrived. Men stepped out carrying bags of rice, cartons of food, cooking oil, new furniture, expensive clothes, and household appliances. Johnson stared in confusion. My daughter, what is all this? Naomi smiled softly. This is only the beginning, Grandpa. Then, one of the men handed Johnson a brown envelope. Johnson opened it slowly. The moment he saw what was inside, his hands began shaking uncontrollably. It was a check, 10 million naira, written clearly in his name. Johnson nearly lost his breath. My daughter, he whispered weakly. What is this? Naomi knelt gently before him. This is for every pain you suffered, she said emotionally. For every night you slept hungry. For the rent you couldn't pay. For the stall that was destroyed. For the last 4,000 naira you gave a crying child when you yourself had nothing. Johnson burst into tears again. But Naomi wasn't done. She brought out another envelope and placed it carefully in his hands. Inside were keys and property documents. Johnson stared at them in confusion. That, Naomi said, smiling through tears, is the key to your new fully furnished 5-bedroom duplex. Johnson froze completely. You will never pay rent again for the rest of your life. At that moment, the old man dropped his knees, crying uncontrollably. God remembered me, he sobbed. Andrew hugged him tightly. Grandpa, he whispered emotionally, this is your harvest. God never forgot your kindness. A few weeks later, Andrew and Naomi had a beautiful garden wedding. It wasn't the loudest wedding in the country, but it was filled with something greater than luxury. Love, meaning, destiny. Naomi walked gracefully in her flowing white gown, while Andrew stared at her like the answer to every prayer he had ever made. Madame Tina watched proudly from the front row, and beside her sat Johnson wearing a magnificent embroidered kaftan, smiling brighter than anyone else there. From a homeless roadside shoemaker to a respected father-in-law and homeowner, God had truly rewritten his story. During the reception, Andrew leaned toward Naomi, smiling. I told you Grandpa would love you. Naomi laughed softly before glancing toward Johnson dancing happily with tears still shining in his eyes. Then she whispered, he gave me his last when nobody else cared. Now I'll spend my life giving him my best. Months later, the mansion echoed with laughter once again after Naomi gave birth to healthy twin boys. Madame Tina proudly carried one baby. Johnson held the other carefully while tears filled his eyes. My daughter, he whispered emotionally. God multiplied your blessings. Andrew wrapped his arms around Naomi gently. You made me the happiest man alive. And finally, after years of pain, rejection, sacrifice, and unanswered prayers, they found peace. Because sometimes, one small act of kindness can change generations forever. And sometimes, the seed you plant in tears returns years later as a miracle beyond imagination.